Ever heard of a place like so idyllic? It's almost mythical. We're talking swaying palm trees, unbelievably blue water, and creatures straight out of like a nature documentary. Giant crabs that open coconuts. Can you believe that?
What's really captivating about the Chagos Archipelago, I think, is that it's um, it's more than just a beautiful cluster of islands in the Indian Ocean. It's
Mhm.
a place where this kind of stunning nature collides with a uh, deeply complex and frankly troubling human history.
And that collision is exactly what we're diving into today, right? You've given us what articles, reports, even some historical accounts all about the Chagos Archipelago and the people who once called it home, the Chagossians.
It's a story that kind of takes us from the 16th century right through the Cold War and all the way into present-day international courts.
Okay, so before we get to the courtrooms, let's like set the scene a little bit. We're talking about more than 50 islands sprinkled across the Indian Ocean, right?
Right, and our Wikipedia articles say they sit atop this massive underwater ridge formed by volcanoes over millions of years. Yeah,
Volcanoes.
millions of years of volcanic activity. That's what's given the Chagos Archipelago its unique geography, and as a result, it's incredible biodiversity.
Makes sense.
We're talking over 700 species of fish, endangered sea turtles, and yes, even those coconut crabs you mentioned. It's like an incredible underwater world.
It does make you wonder, how did those crabs even evolve to do that? Crack coconuts, I mean. But putting the natural wonders aside for a moment, there's a darker side to this paradise. The Chargassians, who have this rich cultural heritage, called these islands home for generations.
And their language, Eloise Creole, it's a fascinating example of how cultures blend and adapt. It's this unique mix of African, Indian, and Malay influences, reflecting the diverse history of those who found themselves in the Chagos Archipelago. Sadly, as we move into the 20th century, their story takes a heartbreaking turn.
That's right. It's the 1960s. Cold War tensions are like running high, and the Chagos Archipelago, with its strategic location in the Indian Ocean, becomes, kind of a pawn in this global power struggle. The UK, which controlled the islands at the time, saw an opportunity.
And this is where things get complicated. You see, the UK wasn't simply looking to just, like, lease Diego Garcia, the largest of the Chagos Islands, for a U.S. military base. They were looking for a way to really solidify their relationship with the U.S. in a time of, great uncertainty.
Right, right.
Alternatives were considered, of course. But Diego Garcia, with its remote location and, and potential for expansion, it kind of emerged as the most, how do you say, the most strategically advantageous option.
So this seemingly idyllic paradise is suddenly thrust into the heart of Cold War tensions. And the Chagossians, well, they became collateral damage.
Between 1967 and 1973, over 1,000 Chagosians were forced from their homes in a move that, well, it continues to spark outrage today.
We're not just talking about some like government relocation program here. We've got firsthand accounts, heartbreaking stories of families like tricked into leaving, told they were going on a trip, or to receive medical care, only to be prevented from ever returning.
Imagine the cruelty of it all. The Chagosians were loaded onto ships with little more than the clothes on their backs, their pets often like killed in front of them, just to, discourage any thoughts of returning.
Awful.
They were essentially dumped on the shores of Mauritius and the Seychelles,
Yeah.
left to rebuild their lives in a completely unfamiliar environment.
It's unimaginable, the sense of loss, the trauma inflicted on these people. It wasn't just their homes that were taken, it was their history, their sense of belonging, their very identity.
And this is where the story of the Chagos Archipelago becomes about more than just this one group of people. It forces us to confront the human cost of these larger geopolitical decisions, the way that smaller nations and indigenous communities often bear the brunt of these, global power plays.
And the Chagossians didn't just accept this fate, did they? They fought back, right? Demanding justice and the right to return to their homeland.
Absolutely, yeah. The Chagosians' resilience is truly remarkable. They never gave up on their claim to the islands, and for decades, their struggle played out in international courts, the halls of the United Nations.
Wow.
We're talking UN resolutions condemning the UK's actions, rulings from the International Court of Justice, even the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea weighing in, all saying that the expulsion of the Chagosians was unlawful.
It's almost overwhelming, like the sheer number of legal challenges. Were any of these rulings actually effective? Did they actually change the UK's stance at all?
It's a great question. And it really gets to the heart of international law, you see. Many of these rulings, especially from the ICJ, they were what's known as advisory opinions.
Okay.
They carry moral weight, and they kind of put pressure on states to comply with international law, but, well, they don't really have the same enforcement power as, say, a domestic court order.
So the UK could and did essentially ignore these rulings for years.
To a certain extent, yes. The UK argued that that these were bilateral agreements, internal matters, between them and Mauritius, and later on between Mauritius and the U.S.
Okay.
However, the rulings did have an impact. This kind of galvanized international support for the Chagosians and really put the UK's actions in the global spotlight.
The articles you provided mentioned a unique form of music, Sega Tambor Chagos, that kind of emerged from this struggle. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Sega Tambor Chagos. It's a poignant example of how the Chagosians preserve their cultural identity, even in exile.
Wow.
It's this soulful, rhythmic music, often featuring, drums, a ravine, it's type of tambourine, and these call and response vocals.
Yeah.
The lyrics often speak of, their longing for their homeland, the pain of displacement, their hope for return. It's really a testament to their resilience and the enduring power of culture.
It's incredible how music can transcend these borders, connect people to their heritage. But while the Chagosans fought for their right to return, what happened to the islands themselves? Diego Garcia, in particular, it became a critical U.S. military base, right?
Yeah, it did, yeah. Diego Garcia's location, right in the heart of the Indian Ocean, made it kind of a strategic prize during the Cold War. And its importance has really only grown in the decades since. Think about it. It provides a launching pad for operations across the Middle East, Asia, Africa. We got articles here from The Spectator that highlight how crucial Diego Garcia is to U.S. power projection, especially in a time of, heightened global tensions.
They even mentioned those controversial rendition flights, right? After 9/11.
Yes, that's right. Diego Garcia was allegedly used as a refueling stop for planes that were involved in the CIA's extraordinary rendition program, where suspected terrorists were, transported to secret prisons around the world. This added another layer of controversy to the island's already, complicated history, raising some serious ethical and legal questions about the base's activities.
It seems like Diego Garcia's strategic importance always came at a cost.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But there's another side to the Chagos Archipelago, one that's easy to overlook amidst all the geopolitical maneuvering. Remember those coconut crabs and the and that unique ecosystem we talked about earlier?
Absolutely. In fact, I remember reading in our Wikipedia articles about the coral reefs around the Chagos being some of the healthiest in the entire Indian Ocean.
Exactly. Despite the impacts of climate change, which are devastating reefs worldwide, the Chagos Archipelago has remained remarkably resilient. It's home to hundreds of coral species, an astonishing array of fish, and it serves as a vital nesting ground for endangered sea turtles. It's a biodiversity hotspot in the truest sense.
But there was some controversy surrounding the UK's decision to create this massive marine protected area around the Chagos in 2010, right?
There was, yeah. While the UK presented it as this, conservation effort, many saw it, including Mauritius, as a way for the UK to kind of further cement its control over the archipelago and potentially hinder the Chagosans' return.
Whoa.
Leaked U.S. diplomatic cables even suggested that the Marine Reserve would make resettlement, and I quote, difficult, if not impossible. This fueled suspicions that the UK that they were more interested in protecting their strategic interests and appeasing the U.S. than in righting a historical wrong.
Feels like a recurring theme in this story.
Yeah.
Competing interests colliding on these tiny islands. On one hand, you have this vital habitat for marine life, this potential beacon of hope in a changing climate. And on the other, you have these ongoing power struggles and the unresolved plight of the Chagosian people.
Precisely. And as we move into the 21st century, the tension between these competing forces comes to a head with this landmark legal battle.
You're talking about the 2019 ruling by the International Court of Justice, right? The one that said that the UK's continued administration of the Chagos Archipelago was unlawful.
Exactly. This was it was a watershed moment. The ICJ, in no uncertain terms, stated that the UK had an obligation to end its administration of the Chagos Archipelago and that the islands should be handed over to Mauritius, quote, as rapidly as possible.
And the UN General Assembly agreed, right? They voted overwhelmingly in favor of Mauritius's sovereignty over the Chagos. What did the UK do in response?
Initially, the UK resisted.
Really?
Yeah, they clung to this argument that, this was a matter of self-determination for the Chagosians, even though the Chagosians themselves had been demanding the right to return for well, for decades. However, the pressure from the international community, it mounted.
So what happened? Did the UK finally give in? So after years of, resisting these international rulings, the UK finally entered into negotiations with Mauritius in 2022. And just recently, they announced a pretty historic agreement, one that has like significant implications for the Chagosians, the US military base on Diego Garcia, and of course, the future of the islands themselves.
It really is a pivotal moment in the Chagos Archipelago's long and turbulent history. According to our news articles from Al Jazeera and the BBC, the UK has formally agreed to cede sovereignty of the islands to Mauritius.
Wow.
That includes Diego Garcia, although the U.S. base will remain operational under a new 99-year lease.
99 years. It seems like the U.S. considers that base incredibly important to its global strategy. But what does this handover actually mean for the Chagosians? Will they finally be able to, return to their homeland?
It's not quite as straightforward as you might hope. The agreement does include provisions for the resettlement of Chagosians, but there's a catch. It only applies to the outer islands, not Diego Garcia. A trust fund has also been established to provide, financial support to the Chagosian community.
So it's a kind of a bittersweet victory, wouldn't you say? On the one hand, they have this international recognition of their claim to the islands. But on the other, Diego Garcia, the heart of their former community, the place where many of them were born, it remains off limits.
And it's important to remember that the Chagosian community is not, it's not a monolith. We have sources here that highlight the diverse perspectives that exist within the diaspora. Some, particularly those who have built lives in the UK, over generations, they have, they have mixed feelings about this handover to Mauritius.
Why is that? You'd think they'd be happy to see their claim to the islands recognized, especially after all this time.
Well, some express concern that Mauritius, that they may not prioritize the Chagosians' needs or truly understand their unique cultural heritage. There's a sense of distrust stemming from what some perceive as neglect of the Chagosian diaspora by the Mauritian government in the past. They fear losing the support systems they've come to rely on in the UK, and of course they worry about what the future holds for them in Mauritius.
It sounds like even with this landmark agreement, there are still so many challenges ahead. Figuring out how this resettlement will work, managing the U.S. base, addressing the concerns of the Chagosian diaspora. It's such a complex situation with no easy answers.
Exactly. And it raises these bigger questions, doesn't it? Questions about the legacy of colonialism, the effectiveness of international law, the rights of indigenous peoples in a world where strategic interests often take precedence. The Chagos Archipelago really serves as this stark reminder of how deeply these issues are intertwined.
It's easy to get lost in the legal battles and the geopolitical maneuvering, but ultimately this is a story about people. People who were forcibly removed from their homes, their culture disrupted, their lives just irrevocably altered by decisions that were made far beyond their control.
And as we reach the end of our deep dive here, I think it's crucial for us to consider this question. Does this handover truly constitute justice for the Chagosians? Or is it, as some argue, too little, too late? Can we truly repair the damage that's been done?
It's a question that really lingers long after you finish reading about this story. The Chagos Archipelago, with its stunning natural beauty and deeply troubled human history, it forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about the world we live in.
It also reminds us of the enduring power of the human spirit. Despite decades of displacement, the Chagosians have never given up on their fight for justice and self-determination. Their story is a testament to the importance of remembering, of fighting for what's right, even when faced with these seemingly insurmountable odds.
To our listeners, we urge you to delve deeper into the sources we've explored today, learn more about the Chagosians, their history, their culture, their ongoing struggle. Consider the complexities of this handover, the challenges that remain, and the questions that have yet to be answered. The story of the Chagos Archipelago is far from over, and it's really up to all of us to ensure that justice, however delayed it may be, is ultimately served.